When the United States waves its flag for Israel at the United Nations in support of the Jews, people often wonder whether it is Israel or the United States that is attacking the Gaza Strip at that moment. In fact, after a century of infiltration by Jewish capital, they have embedded themselves in the core of the United States. With countless chips implanted, from Secretary of State Blinken to Treasury Secretary Yellen to Vice President Harris's husband, today's U.S. President Biden has long been surrounded by influential Jewish figures. Perhaps in the future, there may even be a Jewish president in the United States. Our story today will talk about how the Jews completed 3 significant steps in the United States, from being a marginalized group to successfully integrating into the highest levels of American power. In 1654, when the first recorded Jews landed on the North American continent, they had come from the Netherlands. This group of 23 Jews had been expelled by the decree of the King of Spain, fleeing by boat to Brazil, where they were then driven away by Portuguese colonists and made their way to North America. Years after they arrived in New Amsterdam, the British took control of the land during the Second Anglo-Dutch War and renamed it New York. Objectively speaking, the Jews arrived in North America not much later than the British. Over the following centuries, as the North American colonies developed and the United States rose, the Jews were never absent from the scene. Had their numbers been larger, the United States might even have become a Jewish nation. The Jews at that time largely chose to integrate into the social system established by the Anglo-Saxon settlers. In 1881, Russian Tsar Alexander II was assassinated, and his death triggered a genocide against Jews, one comparable in brutality to the Holocaust under Nazi Germany in later generations. The disaster of this policy was that one of the individuals involved in faking the Tsar's death was a Jewish woman, leading the new ruler to believe that all Jews were engaged in murder and subversive activities. Consequently, a widespread persecution storm swept across Eastern Europe and lasted for decades. According to these policies, 1/3 of the Jews in Eastern Europe would be deported, 1/3 assimilated, and the remaining third exterminated. To avoid becoming part of the 1/3 of Eastern European Jews who were killed on the spot, they desperately fled Eastern Europe. Meanwhile, American ports welcomed wave after wave of Jewish refugees. During the 40 years of refugee migration from Russia, a total of 600,000 Jews perished in the Holocaust, and 2.2 million fled to the United States. After the Soviet Union took power, persecution of Jews in Russia temporarily ceased, but Europe was suddenly hit by another wave of anti-Semitism. 2 consecutive large-scale persecutions caused the surviving Jews to emigrate in large numbers. The United States, as the largest destination for Jewish immigrants outside of Europe, received over 4 million Jewish immigrants in just half a century. As Jews grew from a marginalized group in New York into a sizable ethnic community, they embarked on their second significant step. When Jews first arrived in the United States, most were penniless and had to rely on street jobs to buy daily necessities. The work was grueling and lacked respect, but through perseverance and hard work, it became profitable. The free trade environment in the United States allowed Jews to capitalize on their business acumen. Some Jewish traders transitioned from street vendors to shop owners, while those with more skill entered the American industrial system and became suppliers to major factories. As early as 1890, a New York foundation conducted a survey of Jews and found that of the 22,392 Jews surveyed, 5,261 made a living through business, with half of them being small traders and the other half already owning businesses. After accumulating initial wealth, the second generation of Jews often pursued highly skilled professions, such as law and medicine. These professions were well compensated and required knowledge. After decades of effort, the Jewish community accumulated substantial wealth, eventually setting their sights on the U.S. financial industry. With funding from their distant European relatives, the Rothschild family, American Jews established dozens of large conglomerates within the rich and company empire. At that time, the top 10 conglomerates in the United States included Morgan, Rockefeller, and DuPont, and 6 of them were controlled by Jews. Rothschild, who led the family from Germany to global influence, once said that whoever controls the currency supply of the British Empire controls the British Empire. This sentiment became a mantra for Jewish tycoons around the world, and they naturally followed suit when establishing their own consortia, exerting influence over the U.S. dollar. Also, at the end of the 19th century, the U.S. government exhausted its gold reserves during a financial crisis, leaving the entire country on the brink of bankruptcy. The Morgan Consortium and the Rothschild family seized the opportunity to lend 3.5 million ounces of gold to the U.S. government. However, in order to secure this gold, the U.S. government sold the right to issue 30-year treasury bonds to these 2 major Jewish consortiums. This situation even led to a saying in the United States at the time: the Democratic Party belongs to the Morgan family, and the Republican Party belongs to the Rockefeller family. Although this notion was ridiculed, it foreshadowed the next steps of Jewish influence in America. After gaining control of the lifeline of the American economy, Jews began their ascent into the political arena in the early 20th century. Initially, Jews were rarely able to participate directly in politics. influenced by Jewish education and the American electoral system. However, the rise of Franklin Roosevelt brought change at an opportune time. In 1932, after Roosevelt secured the Democratic presidential nomination, Jewish businessman Henry Morgenthau Sr. became the vice chairman of his executive finance committee. Once Roosevelt was elected, Henry Morgenthau Jr., the son of Henry Morgenthau Sr., was appointed as Secretary of the Treasury. The Morgenthau Plan, designed to reshape post-war Germany, was one of the first significant acts proposed by this Jewish politician. During Roosevelt's administration, the proportion of Jews in top government positions reached an unprecedented 15%, while Jews made up only 3.5% of the American population at the time. Although Morgenthau's plan was never fully implemented, watching young Henry Morgenthau call for harsh punishment of German war criminals demonstrated to Jews that changing their fate was not solely achieved by making money. This period also coincided with the founding of the State of Israel, an event that fostered great cohesion among Jews worldwide. American Jews took the opportunity to establish hundreds of political and social groups. These political organizations became like chips implanted in the brain of the American government, continually asserting Jewish interests. One of the most representative groups was the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, which American Fortune magazine ranked as the largest lobbying organization in the field of foreign policy. Whenever a slight disturbance occurred in Congress, AIPAC was quick to rally lawmakers to vote in favor of Jewish interests. Due to its decades-long record of influence, the committee earned the title King of Capitol Hill in the United States. Jewish statistics show that there are over 500 Jewish organizations in the U.S. like AIPAC, and their invincibility stems from two key factors: their persistence in fostering American sympathy for Jews and, more importantly, the immense political power they wield. In 1964, when Israel requested a large number of tanks and other weapons from the United States, the U.S. National Security Council, under the direction of McGeorge Bundy, once analyzed why Israel felt bold enough to make such demands. The conclusion was clear: there was significant pressure on the U.S. because it was an election year. In the 1960s, during the Kennedy administration, Jews provided 60% of the campaign funds for Democratic presidential candidates, while 40% of the funds for the Republican Party also came from Jewish donors. It did not matter who occupied the White House, as long as a president dared to oppose Jewish interests, his political career would be at risk. After Kennedy won the election in the early 1960s, he visited Israel to express his gratitude and personally assured Israeli Prime Minister Ben-Gurion that in order to secure Jewish support, he had to act in their favor. However, the current situation is even more serious than it was back then. With the deepening of Jewish political influence, more and more Jews have come out from behind the scenes and into the spotlight. Since the 1990s, the number of Jewish members in both the U.S. House of Representatives and the Senate has remained at around 40. What does this mean? Consider that during President Obama's administration, he faced significant opposition from a political faction known as the Tea Party, which derailed many of his policies despite only having about 30 members in Congress. Now imagine the influence of Jewish members who have consistently held over 40 seats for an extended period. After a century of political operation, Jews have secured more than just seats in Congress. When President Biden came to power, his so-called most diverse administration in American history ceded two key positions, Secretary of State and Secretary of the Treasury, to Jewish individuals. Will there be a fourth step for Jewish influence in the United States? Could they successfully aim for the presidency itself? Follow, like, and stay tuned for the next issue to find out.